Good morning. I'm Steve Wormiel. I'm president of the Tufts University Alumni Association. I'm a member of the class of 1972, parent of a A10 graduate, been volunteering in Washington for about 35 years, past chair of the Alumni Council Awards Committee and various other activities. I'm delighted to see all of you here and to welcome you to Lead It 2018. The Tufts Alumni Leadership Summit. Before I start doing some introductions, I know that many people in the country and around the world have had a tough couple of weeks, and so I would like to just take a moment and ask you to have a moment of silent reflection, please. All right, thank you. On behalf of the members of the Lead It Planning Committee, Barbara Clark, Kate Kaplan, Dave Myers, Tim Nelson, Elizabeth Salem, I'd like to thank you for coming today. I know some of you have traveled very far, and we're glad to have you here. Before we go any further, let me just say a huge thanks to the dedicated and talented staff of the Office of Alumni Relations, which has done an incredible amount of work to make this weekend happen, especially Julie O'Connor and her team. Just a quick thanks. This is our third Lead It event, and once again we have gathered together our most engaged alumni to learn from university administrators, faculty members, and your fellow alumni leaders. We're especially excited to have such a strong showing of young alumni. They represent a whopping 36% of our attendees. To fully appreciate how many of you there are, I'd like to ask everyone who graduated in the last 10 years to please stand for a moment. Thank you. You are indeed the future of the alumni community, and I thank you for joining us this weekend. Another data point that I would like to share with you is the number of attendees who are not currently volunteering for Tufts. They represent 21% of our attendees. To you, I would also like to extend a special welcome. Clearly, you are committed to Tufts, and we hope that as you get to know some of your volunteers over the weekend, you'll feel compelled to engage on a deeper level. Over the next 2 days, you will have the opportunity to hear from Tufts faculty on a range of topics, from the power of engagement through civic studies, to the science of stereotyping, to the fight against infectious diseases, and to the complexities of human migration. This afternoon, we'll have a university leadership panel featuring our president, the provost ad interim, and the chairman of the board of trustees, where you will learn more about the Tufts Comprehensive Campaign, Brighter World, followed by a chance to hear stories from some of our alumni volunteers. There will also be interactive sessions where you can learn about volunteer opportunities to expand your current volunteer roles. And before dinner, we have a networking reception with student groups. It's a full day that I think you will find both illuminating and fun. The purpose of Lead It is to give current and prospective alumni volunteers the chance to communicate, collaborate, and network. We hope that afterwards you will go back to your own communities inspired by what you've learned. We also hope that you will come away feeling even more engaged with Tufts. Having access to the university administration, the president, provost, and trustees is one way to achieve this. Having the opportunity to train not only for your current volunteer roles, but also for future leadership roles is another way. Volunteer engagement is a major component of the Tufts University Alumni Association's strategic plan. And to strengthen that engagement, TUAA intends to evaluate the interests and needs of all alumni, partner with the Office of Alumni Relations to maximize the quality and reach of alumni experiences and contributions, promote civic engagement, and leverage available communications channels through targeted messaging. And your help, your insight, is a big part of achieving those goals. Alumni engagement is also vital to the success of the Brighter World campaign, which is empowering Tufts students, faculty, and alumni to make a difference on our campuses and around the globe. As president of TUAA, I'm proud to tell you that the Alumni Association is committed to supporting the campaign and has pledged to contribute $30 million with a 100% participation rate. To date, we have commitments for $26.3 million of that $30 million from members of the Tufts Alumni Council. The Council will also be working with University Advancement to directly engage in advocacy and outreach, to raise participation in annual giving among the alumni body, and to foster an enduring culture of philanthropy across the Tufts community. Although undergraduate participation is on the decline at most colleges and universities, Tufts is on the upward trend, and we want to lead by example in support of this important mission. It's an exciting time here at Tufts. Our scientists are tackling some of the world's deadliest diseases. Our researchers are involved in some of the most complex global issues of the day. And you'll get to hear from some of them during the faculty panels. Tufts continues to bring together the best and brightest students who, upon graduation, are prepared to address the most consequential challenges of our times. They are making a difference in the world, and so are you, our engaged Tufts alumni. Lastly, a few housekeeping items. I believe you all received a text last night with some reminders about Lead It. A few more texts will be going out during the event containing important reminders to keep us on schedule. So don't be alarmed when your phones start buzzing all at once. We've got a hashtag this year, hashtag Tufts Lead It. So please feel free to tweet about your favorite Lead It moments as they're happening, and be sure to tag us at Tufts University. You can also jot down your favorite moment on the board in the registration area downstairs, and we just might feature your moment in our future Lead It marketing campaign. If you see a staff member or two typing on their phones during a presentation, you can safely assume that they are tweeting, posting, or sharing something interesting about Lead It across our social channels. And finally, this is my mini Oprah moment. I have a gift for all of you. Remember to turn your clocks back tonight. Thank you very much, and let's get started.
Hello, friends. Aren't we glad it's raining and gross, so we're not tempted to go apple picking or go for a nice leisurely stroll or a bike ride? Instead, we're going to be inside all day together because we like each other. Hi, I'm Barbara Clark. I'm co-chair of the Lead It Planning Committee, and I'm a member of the class of '88, hashtag '80s. We're really having a moment, I think, with the '80s. And I'm a past president of the Alumni Association, and it feels like, I think it's like 5 cycles ago, which feels like forever. And I think we have pretty much every other president here, too, so it's great. Anyways, our first panel is called Leading the Way Through Civic Studies at Tufts. In an ever-changing and challenging world, Tufts is making a global impact by supporting initiatives around civic life and extending its global reach. Tufts can achieve this in part because of the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. Its nationally recognized Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, which is also called CIRCLE, because we love our acronyms, is the leading source of research on youth civic engagement, which we've been seeing all kinds of media about lately, and I'm so excited for this panel. Their university-wide initiative, Jumbo Vote, works to facilitate voter registration, tackles barriers for Tufts students to vote in local communities, increases voter education, and supports events and programs that foster political engagement. Today we're going to hear about the latest interdisciplinary teaching and partnerships that make Tufts the national leader in the field of civic studies. Moderating our discussion is Dr. Diane Ryan, Associate Dean for Programs and Administration at Tisch College. Join me in welcoming Dr. Ryan to kick it off.
Is this going to automatically? Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you to all of the planning committee, to Julie O'Connor for keeping us straight, and certainly to all of you for coming out and spending your Saturday morning listening to us. It's really quite flattering, humbling, symbolic that we get to be the first panel, because I think a lot of the things that we're going to talk about will touch on many of the things that are on the news this morning and every day. And I think it's emblematic of the commitment that Tufts has made to putting civic life and civic engagement kind of at the center of everything that we do here at Tufts. Just a little bit about me before I introduce the rest of the panel members. I'm probably the newest of the Tisch family on the stage right now. I joined a little over a year ago, so I'm almost an academic year and a half into the job. I came after 29 years in the Army, and 10 of those spent on the faculty at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. And when I was leaving that position and thinking about what I would do next, and people say, oh, why did you leave the Army? Because after 30 years, you have to leave. There's a expiration date or shelf life. So I wondered, what will I do that is as service-focused and as meaningful, and where else are there universities that have this kind of commitment? And I found that at Tufts. Now, I get to pick out what I wear to work every day, like no other time in my professional life, but I have definitely found a community of committed and active citizens, scholars, practitioners that are pretty inspiring to come to work every day. And so I'm going to ask each of my colleagues to say a little bit about themselves, and I'll start with my battle buddy over there, Peter Levine, the Associate Dean now for Academic Affairs.
Thanks, Diane. This is just an intro of ours, just who we are. Yeah, it's fantastic to have Diane. By the way, it's transformative for us, mainly because of her individual excellence, but also the experience and perspective of the Army is tremendous. So I'm Peter Levine. I'm now the academic dean of Tisch College, and I also have appointments in political science and philosophy and in the medical school through a long story that I don't need to bother you with.
I'm Alnur Ibrahim. I'm on the faculty here at the Fletcher School and also at the Tisch College of Civic Life. And I work especially with organizations that have a social purpose, whether they're businesses or nonprofits.
Hi, I'm Hilary Binda, and I am in the Visual and Critical Studies Department, which is actually at the Museum School, but I am now very much a part of Tisch College and director of the Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies program and of the Tufts University Prison Initiative of Tisch College.
Great, thank you so much. I was going to start with a joke about a philosopher, a businessman, and an English professor going to a bar, but it wasn't that funny. So instead, I will just briefly talk about the mission of Tisch for those of you that are unfamiliar, because when we walk around and tell people we're from Tisch College, they get confused. Is that the library? Is that over at the gym? Are you at NYU? No. We're not. And just a little bit about the history, if you're unfamiliar, Tisch is we're about to celebrate our 20th anniversary in another year or two. But the college has a little bit longer history than that. Started out as University College and went through about 6 name changes before we came to the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. And I put the mission up here. And what is unique about Tisch College, at least from my vantage point, and when I explain this to my colleagues at peer institutions, is this idea that it is a college with a dean. Our dean sits with all the other deans of the other professional schools and alongside arts and sciences. And we are a resource for the entire university. And I like to use this I word, integration, because I think that we are the integrators of all things civic across the curriculum to every corner of the university. So if you ask Alan Solomont, our dean, how many students do you have, he'll say 11,000, because it's our goal that we will touch every person associated with Tufts, whether that be an undergraduate student in philosophy, or a student at Fletcher, or a medical student, as well as provide resources for all our faculty and then be a liaison or provide outreach into the surrounding communities of Medford, Somerville, Chinatown. Now the Fenway is another, we're going to talk about Concord in a second, and Grafton at the vet school. And so we have these three pillars, if you will, that we organize around of education, and that I mean that in the broadest sense of the term, and that will come out a little bit, supporting research, so that's both basic and applied research, as well as practice, and that's the outreach into the community. So I want to kick it off by talking about one of our newer initiatives and getting from the horse's mouth, if you will, the creator of our new civic studies major. So people want to know, what is civic studies and why was it the right time and the right place for us to introduce this?
Right, thanks, Diane. So I'm supposed to talk about civic studies, which is the name of a new arts and sciences major at Tufts, but it's also broader than that. So I think, for example, I think my colleagues here, including Al Noor, who teaches Fletcher students, are involved in civic studies, but it's up to him to decide if that's true. So how can I explain it? Just a few minutes ago, as we sat here, we all very appropriately, even movingly, I think, closed our eyes or looked down at the ground and thought about the tumultuous events of the last couple of weeks, whether it's murders in a synagogue in Pittsburgh or the caravan or even the gyrations of the stock market, whatever was on your mind. And I think at that kind of moment, the question that appropriately is on your mind is, what do I think about this, right? What do I think about this? But, you know, that's not a satisfactory question in the long run. It's not satisfactory in at least two ways. It's about thinking, and at some point we've got to do something, right? So what are we going to do? And it's also an I question. I mean, it was appropriate that we sat there silently because you do have to look inward, but you need more than I. You need a we for, I think, two fundamental reasons. One is because on our own, none of us can accomplish enough. We don't have enough power or influence. But also because on our own, we're not smart enough or wise enough or thoughtful enough. So we need other people to talk to, right, to check our own views against. So I like to constantly say, and people get tired of it, the question for a citizen is, what should we do? What should we do? And it's a very hard question. It's hard in the particular context. If the question is climate change, then it's technologically complicated and scientifically complicated and economically complicated. But also just generally figuring out how to address the question, what should we do, is hard. How do you have functional groups? How do you have a dialogue with any group of any size that leads to better wisdom instead of worse outcomes, instead of polarization or rumor mongering? And how do you do those things when the group is not just 5 well-intentioned people who know each other, but tens of millions of people on Twitter, for example? So what groups are functional? What makes them functional? How do they form? And so this is essentially the subject matter, broadly defined, I would say, of civic studies. And it's not only a major at Tufts and a thread through our other work, it's also a reform agenda in academia in general, and we have other allies at other institutions. And we even have a manifesto of 10 or 12 years ago, which had a Nobel laureate and others sign on to it. The reason it's a reform agenda is because there's an argument behind it which says that question, what should we do, gets lost in universities, but really gets lost in intellectual life in the 21st century in some interesting ways. It gets lost because the question gets shifted to what should be done, or what's going on, and why, but not what should we do. And so to learn how to think what should we do, how do you do that? Partly, I think, experientially. So you actually participate in groups of different scales and sizes, and you learn how to do it. And that's the traditional American model. That's what de Tocqueville, more than 100 years ago, said Americans were good at. We learned how to think that way by doing it. But and I should say, Tisch College is deeply committed to making it possible to learn experientially. So, and that was our DNA. That was our original founding. And we have many programs for students and staff and faculty to experience civic life experientially. And in some ways, that's part of especially what Hillary's going to talk about. Only a part of it, though, I think. But it's also this question of how to think, what should we do, is intellectually extremely challenging and very unresolved. So it's not as if the experienced adult knows how and just needs to tell the young folks how to do it. There are many ways that we do not know how to do it. We don't know how to run a nonprofit in the global south. We don't know how to have a civic discussion in a prison. We don't know how to handle things like Twitter, right? So there's there's a set of addressable but unaddressed questions. And so this is where at a university like Tufts, appropriately, because this is our central model at a university like Tufts, is to marry the undergraduate experience and the graduate student experience with cutting-edge research, to have the students apprenticing with people who are actually asking unanswered questions but attempting to answer those questions. So I can kind of wind up by saying civic studies is a new major, and in a way its guiding question is, how do you think about what should we do? We have an intro course, we have a lot of other required or optional courses, including, for example, Hillary's. But it connects to two other things, and I'll just say this really quickly. One other thing that connects to is the internal research effort of Tisch College itself. So you heard about Circle, but just a little more broadly, there are, 14 maybe, 12 or 14 people fully employed, full-time scholars inside of Tisch College, not being paid by tuition dollars and not primarily teaching students, or some of them never teaching students, instead being funded by grants and contracts that we raise and gifts to operate like a nonprofit that is trying to address some of the questions of civic studies for public audiences nationally and internationally. And the questions of civic studies are enormously broad, so we do specialize, and we have I would say a dominant position in studies of what causes young Americans, ages 15 to 30, to become engaged in different ways. So when the election happens on Tuesday, we will be the sole source of, in the country, of data on youth turnout, and that's based on years of work. But so there's a whole bunch of people inside of Tisch College who show up in the morning, switch on a computer, crunch data, write grants, interact to some extent with students, but are primarily trying to talk to national audiences about some of the issues. And then the remaining thing I want to say is that we also have these partnerships with beloved and valuable faculty across the campus who study many other dimensions of these problems. Because we specialize at Tisch College, because I think we have to specialize, but then we try to broaden. So these two are great exemplars, and I don't want to do a spoiler alert so they can tell you what they do, but you'll notice how diverse it is and how different it is from studying young Americans' voter turnout. So, and we could proliferate the list, so we could talk about Moon Duchin from mathematics, who has got an increasingly dominant voice nationally on applying mathematics to improving congressional districting and fighting gerrymandering. Or we could talk about Doug Brugge in the medical school, who has an amazing 10-year-long research project whose topic is the effects of highway pollution on health, which is actually very serious. But the thing that makes it a civic studies project is not the particles that get into people's lungs, but it's the fact that he worked for 10 years with a whole coalition of community groups to do the research. And so the way that figuring out how to do research with complicated community groups in multiple languages in urban Boston would be his contribution. So much more to be said, but I think that might be a good place for me to stop.
Great. So that is a nice segue into the question that I wanted to ask Al-Noor when we were specifically talking about the civic studies major and that being an undergraduate program. Could you please tell us a little bit more about how civic studies is relevant more broadly in the graduate and professional schools and most notably in your own work?
Thank you. So I'm gonna tie this to Peter's the question that he asked in terms of what should we do, which is really a central question to the Fletcher School. To just give you a tiny bit of history, Fletcher School was founded in 1933, and it was founded specifically as an international affairs school, and it was in fact the first truly global affairs school in the country. Now just think about 1933. This was the Great Depression. It was a period of increasing isolationism, strong nationalism globally. Sounds like I'm talking about today. And it was at that period that there was an insight that what if we could actually train people to think and act globally? So in that sense, it was pretty iconoclastic. And I think 8 or 10 students in the first class. But that mission has continued to remain incredibly relevant. What's changed, I think, is a couple of things. So universities tend to be very siloed. And this university has been no exception. And so you've got different departments doing their own things. But what I think has really changed in the past 10 years, I've been here for close to 3, but from talking to Peter and others, what I think has really changed is partly the role of Tisch, right? So Diane described it as an integrator. It's really is a glue across civic life-related work across the university. And it's an attempt to counter the tendencies of organizations, of people to be very isolationist. And so breaking down the silos in that sense. The other thing that I think has changed within Fletcher is, so initially when it was established, and for many, many years, core focus was on government. What is the role of the public sector? And Fletcher has had very strong connections to multilateral agencies, United Nations, multilateral development banks. Our current acting dean, Ian Johnstone, was a very senior manager in the United Nations, worked directly in Secretary General Kofi Annan's office. And we have a lot of people that have worked in the State Department, many ambassadors coming through, so very public sector focused. The big shift has been increasingly a lot of attention to civil society as well as business. So the connection to civil society is obvious, right? So international NGOs, social movements, strong interest among the research as well as the courses that students take here. But the new entrant really in the past several years has been business. And it's a recognition of the fact that social problems, of course, don't recognize sector boundaries, whether that's government, business, or civil society, and that they really require an integration. And this plays through in the teaching that I think we'll talk about in a little while. So I won't sort of touch on exactly how that happens in the teaching at this moment. But it's really this question of, if we're going to ask sort of what should we do, we need to have ways of thinking about the players in that environment and how we think about the cross-sectoral work. And so increasingly, not only do we bring in faculty, practitioners, visiting scholars, that are from across the sectors, but also our students are going out and working within those sectors. But what ties them together is the DNA of the school and in relationship the DNA of the Tisch College, which is all about social change. And so a student that goes into finance is really thinking about, well, how do we create models of finance that are inclusive? A student that goes into a major corporate actor, whether it's Coca-Cola or Pepsi, is thinking about, well, what are the effects of this organization in terms of the physical environment? What are its effects on climate change or natural resources? Right? If you're a Coke or a Pepsi, you're using a lot of water. So how do you connect that back to the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and actually make that not a side objective within those corporations, but actually really central to the business model? So that's the kind of training that we try to impart here through curriculum and research. But it all comes back to what should we do and how do we do it so that it's so societally relevant.
Great, thank you so much. So this brings me to Hillary, and we've talked a little bit about teaching and practice, and I think you really marry these two together in a very unique way that I would love for you to tell everyone about.
Okay. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you very much for having me. And it's an honor to be a part of Tisch. And the first thing I want to say is that the prison project, which I'll describe in a moment, really wouldn't be here in any way if it weren't for Tisch. When I sort of switched campuses 3 years ago and became part of a faculty cohort at Tisch, I met other people. Is this okay? Is it too loud? No? I met other people who were also interested in criminal justice reform, abolition, prison abolition, and education on the inside, and formed a team of people that are university-wide. We have, the other two, my other two research partners are in the School of Public Health and also Arts and Sciences. So the other way that Tisch supports this is by supporting us financially and philanthropically. We're so grateful to Tisch College and just to be part of the community there. So what the Prison Initiative does at this point is it's sort of three-pronged, and I wonder if some of the younger alum have participated at all in the tutoring on the inside. If you all, did anybody tutor in prison when you were at Tufts? No. Okay. So that's a program we started 3 years ago by bringing in Petey Green, which is a wonderful national organization separate from us. But developing on that program that trains and brings undergraduates and graduate students into prisons in Massachusetts and nationally to support people inside doing educational programming, we're now beginning what will be a degree program for a cohort of people who are incarcerated in Massachusetts, actually at MCI Concord, which is why I was trying to push to include Concord as one of our campuses. So this program will be we are partnering with Bunker Hill Community College. They will actually be offering the associate's degree by reverse transferring credits. It's taught by Tufts faculty, full-time tenure stream professors for the most part. And it'll last 3.5 years, and we hope to be able to continue that program. So we're working to be able to support that in a more long-term way. The RAND Corporation in 2012 came out with a study, a meta-analysis of a number of different studies that look at the impact for people who are incarcerated of having some exposure to education before they release. And the impact on recidivism was just very clear, 43% decrease in return to prison rates. That didn't specify post-secondary or college education. And when you do that, put that lens on it, it brings the number of people who recidivate down to 0 to 1%, particularly those who receive a credential, a degree. So that's one piece of the project that's very exciting and has been not easy to create through working with the state, but we've done it. So that begins next semester. And the other piece that is part of how we sort of built up so much interest on the Tufts campus is that we're offering a course, I teach this course, called The Literature of Confinement on the inside, bringing in Tufts students. So we have incarcerated students and Tufts students together taking this literature course. Everybody gets college credit for it. Really thank you to Tufts. Most universities are not willing to do this. We had absolutely no problem sort of suggesting this, and Tufts saying, of course, if they're doing the work of a Tufts college, accredited course, they should get that credit. So in that class, and I can talk more about it, people, to first address the Tufts students, their lives are entirely changed by this experience. So most of us don't go inside prisons. They go in and not only kind of understand what these prisons are and what it's like to be inside, a little bit of what it's like to be inside, but they get to know the people inside. And many of those students have come out of the class deciding on the major, the career that they want to pursue, things like public defenders. We've had 2 people who decided they want to be public defenders as a result of the experience. 2 actually, who want to go into prison healthcare, learning what they've learned about the healthcare system in prisons. So it's had that kind of a concrete impact because of the emotional impact that getting to know people inside can create. The impact on the incarcerated people has also been really extensive, and I have lots of stories about people's not just sort of gratitude about being able to forget they're in prison for a little while. That's always a very powerful thing to hear, and that's the power of education. And I think the other thing I want to say about the Tufts students is they see that impact. So when, as happened yesterday or Thursday, an incarcerated student tells one of the Tufts students, I had 3 people come to my cell the other day and want me to go out and fight, which would have meant a long solitary confinement stay. Could have meant 10 years, depending on what happened. And he says, I decided not to do it because I didn't want to jeopardize my experience in this class and the potential to continue in programming and in the Tufts program, and it just entirely changed his life in that little moment. So I have many stories like that, but I'd be happy to talk more. So anyway, gratitude to Tisch for supporting the project.
Yeah, it sounds like he didn't want to let that community down too, right? The group of his fellow students. So that's really powerful. I just will pile on to this because I went to the first closing ceremony from the first class that we offered last fall, and I was completely blown away. I didn't know what to expect. I had been in the federal penitentiary before out in Fort Leavenworth, and I was not only so moved by what was going on with the prisoners, but seeing the transformation of our Tufts students was I don't even have any words for it. But that kind of brings me to this point that I want to ask Alnur. How do we, I know your expertise is in measuring social impact. So how do we know if what we're doing is moving the needle? Like, are we really making a difference, or are we just making ourselves feel good by all the things we're talking about?
So she didn't warn me that she was going to ask me that question. I think it's a really important one. And, we're an academic institution. We have the resources to actually put behind a question like this. We can ask it for Tisch, and Diane, in fact, led us through a week or 2 ago a process of the Tisch-affiliated faculty to actually try and lay out what it is that our objectives are in our own work that's related to civic engagement, and how we might actually begin to articulate what its results might be, and then the next question would be how we would follow that. And so, at its very beginning, we need to have some sort of a theory of change, a set of hypotheses that if we could lay out, so if we do A, B, and C, then we expect X, Y, and Z to occur. And that's a set of hypotheses. And then we can articulate, so where do we actually have control over any of this? And so certainly among our students, we have control over what they do while they're with us. But once they leave and they become you, we have actually very limited influence. And so that question of causality as to the stuff that you do now and that you love doing now, Can we attribute any of that to what occurred while you were here on campus? And to the degree that in interviews we get consistent messaging that these were the things that made a real difference to us, and particularly if those are things that you couldn't get elsewhere, then we know that perhaps there was something. I think we have to be somewhat humble about it, because some of you are so remarkable, you probably could have gone anywhere and still gotten where you are. But I think there are distinctive things that we can point to, and so the kind of societal emphasis on the Tufts campus, and particularly through Tisch, I think is very distinct among higher educational institutions. You might see it in particular departments, but you don't see it across the institution. And so to the extent that we get feedback that says that our work is really about making a difference in society, and that was really strengthened in our insight and understanding and ways of acting on it while we were at Tufts, then I think we can begin to make sort of credible claims around this. On a more narrow level, we can think about this in our own classes. So, for example, I teach a course on leadership this semester. And the course is divided into a bunch of modules. One is about how to design and run effective teams. And there's a lot of really good research out there on what it takes to create an effective team. Students often coming in think about, well, when they're working in student projects, they can kind of divide up the tasks, and that's teamwork. That's not teamwork. That's simply separation of tasks. It's what Max Weber, the great sociologist, would have called bureaucracy. Not in a pejorative sense, but simply in a descriptive sense. It's separation of tasks. Teamwork really requires attention to problems that can't be solved by individuals, and where learning across different skill sets occurs. And we can actually develop the conditions, both in terms of the design of teams as well as the design of process for doing this. So this can be taught. There's another module in there which is all about tying the individual's personal values and motivations to then how they relate this to their own leadership style, right? So the so-called authentic leader, there's really something behind this in terms of really connecting your own values so that they're reflected in terms of how you run a team or how you run an organization. And we look at a lot of examples of that. And I'm getting feedback. So the first time I taught this course here at Fletcher was just a little over 2 years ago. And I'm hearing constantly back from students that are now in the workforce saying, I'm actually referring back to my notes. I'm working on teams differently than I would have. And that gives me some sense that if we were to pursue this systematically, we might be able to get a sense that it actually makes a difference. And then the third thing, and then I'll stop there, is if we think about learning as sort of a three-point triangle, knowing, doing, and being. So the knowing piece is, it's the analytical, it's the logical kind of work that we tend to associate with the academia. But that's really only one part of learning. We can't have holistic learning without the other two pieces. So the doing is the experiential piece. And so increasingly we're seeing, both at Fletcher, but across the university, and not just here, a lot more experiential work to try and connect what you're learning in your brain with what you're doing. And so in a course that I teach called Managing NGOs and Social Enterprises, I put students in teams and they work with a client organization in terms of working with that business or that nonprofit in terms of clarifying their theories of change, their hypotheses of change, and actually putting in place metrics for tracking whether that's occurring or not. That's the doing piece. The third piece is the being piece, which comes back to sort of personal values and going from, what do I care about to what do we care about, and how can we actually operationalize this to kind of bring this back full circle to Peter's earlier comments. And that piece of it actually, I think, in much of academia is still pretty absent. People gain their values from their family upbringing, from their social communities, from their religious background, from their faith, and from the broader culture within which they're embedded. But we tend to have very few opportunities, except for perhaps in truly introspective disciplines like philosophy, to reflect on that on a day-to-day basis. And I think professional schools are beginning to go there. And so we can also ask, to come back to this question of how do we know if we're making a difference? Do students have a clear sense from the moment they come in to when they leave, a real difference in terms of an understanding of their values and how they operationalize those in terms of connecting with people that are different from them and in terms of building teams and organizations that can actually make progress on problems?
Terrific. So I want to make a public service announcement so I don't forget. If you get your alumni survey, please fill it out and say what were the most transformational things that you experienced, and that'll help us to measure these kinds of things and tell your classmates, because that would be an indicator that that's helping us. So those are important to us. I was going to ask another question, but I think that instead I want to give you all an opportunity to ask questions of the panel. So is there a microphone? I see a hand up. Okay, the microphones are coming around. We've got one gentleman with his hand up here, and then the next one in the back. Two in the back.
So it's a question for Peter. You mentioned that we will be the exclusive source of youth data voter turnout for the 2018 election. So after you said that, I went on Google and I searched youth data voter turnout for the U.S. midterm elections. I searched a bunch of key terms, and I didn't find Tufts. I found a story from the Kennedy School on Time Magazine. I found stories on CNN. I found a bunch of stuff, but I didn't find Tufts anywhere. And I scrolled down pretty far, and I searched different key terms. Then I went on the Tufts website, and I searched for the same thing. And I found exclusive research where youth voter turnout could matter in 2018, and it's from March 27th, 2018. It's an article that was written internally, I think. In internet terms, that might as well have been in the prehistoric age. So my question to you is, we're doing all this great work. Here are the leaders in front of you that will go out and help raise money for the university and talk about all the great things that Tufts is doing. But when our peers go out and search for this great stuff, they don't find it. What's the university doing to market itself and help us be visible outside in the world so that it makes our job in raising funds and telling that story of what Tufts is doing that's so great a little bit easier?
So I think there's a subtle issue there that we do worry about and work on, but it's a little hard. So those stories all have our data in it, and the Time magazine, and they also have quotes from our people, and we were actually we were on the Today Show. We're on news media every day. The journalists have three choices for how to identify the work. They can identify it as Tufts, as Tisch College, or as Circle. And Circle has a substantial brand because it goes back to, I moved it up from University of Maryland. So we get diluted, the brands get diluted. And we actually have thought about trying to sort of suppress the Circle brand, but that's actually not such an easy call because Circle's raised $20 million on its brand, and that's money that comes to Tufts and from a lot of stakeholders who aren't investing in Tufts. They're not Tufts alumni. So I think you'll actually find that we're driving all those stories. That it's true that the Harvard Institute of Politics had a poll out a week ago, but actually our poll got, which was about 3 weeks ago, got 30 times more coverage. But I think the Tufts brand is a little diluted. And we worry about it, we try to work on it, but I can tell you, if you sit there telling a reporter, especially a broadcast reporter, I'm the Lincoln Filene professor in the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life and responsible for Circle, which is the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, and that's at Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts. Not all of that makes it into the story.
I'm just like, and so that's where, back to what Costa's saying is like, we need to figure out a way to amplify that. So you're totally right. Like, everybody's going to say all that. So maybe that's a to-do or something that we need to figure out how to do that, because it is ridiculous that we don't have as much recognition in that.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Casey Carpenter from the class of 1980, And I recently founded my own business where I work with leaders, especially women, in corporations, or perhaps they have their own businesses, at the intersection of public speaking, sales, and leadership. And although my question may sound a little redundant, it is a little bit different, because I'd like to know how I can get my hands on research so that I can cite studies and really pertinent surveys when I am going out and facilitating workshops.
Yes, so thank you for that question, Casey. So certainly the work that comes out of Fletcher, we have a dedicated communications and media team. The best way to kind of get regular updates on what's happening at the Fletcher School and new research is there's a once-a-week email, sort of visually appealing, that lays out things, interesting things that have happened this past week and what's coming up. And it tends to go out late Sunday night, so you've got it in your inbox on Monday morning. And so the easiest way is to just go right onto the Fletcher website, and then there's a link to get that regular mailing. Or you can just give me your card, and I'll pass it on to our communications people to make sure that you get that.
Oh, no, it's way in the back. It's way in the back. And then you. Sorry. Yeah. Can you turn his microphone on, please?
Again to the broader room, and thanks to the panel. In another volunteer life, I've had the opportunity to review the accreditation of a number of institutions, and this relates to the terrific prison initiative. I noticed that some number of community colleges are engaged in prison pedagogy, and I wondered if the Tisch folks, you specifically, are engaged in researching and teaching to other teachers the pedagogy of teaching in prisons. And thank you for your work.
Sure, thank you for the question. I don't, at this point, consider myself an expert in that. So that's my first response is, I do feel like what Tufts is doing is a very collective project, and that we are all learning together and will be learning together over the next few years about teaching on the inside. But the kind of quick answer is that it has radically changed my teaching here as well. And we are involved in research. We're working on, we have a study that's approved at Tufts and in the process of getting approvals through the state, where we will track the impact of the educational program on incarcerated people, but also on the faculty. So I'm thinking that that's a place where at least it's looking at our program specifically, but of course we're researching other programs as well as part of that. So I think we are working toward that. Bunker Hill is our partner, and they've been involved, though not on the inside, but through correspondence courses with criminal justice and education in the state. There's a national conference of prison higher education that all of the college programs on the inside take part in. We meet next week, actually, in Indiana. There's a conference, and that's a place where those panels and discussions happen. So there is, yes, increasingly writing about this work, and we're going to do our best to participate in that as well. I'll just add that we have a study that we're kind of coming to the end of now. We're writing up the report on about the impact of college and prison on formerly incarcerated people. So, and teaching the pedagogy is a huge part of it. So thank you.
You have the microphone, so you I don't, just start talking and maybe he can turn it on.
I have a pretty loud voice, so I don't think it'll be a problem unless it's not going to record. Oh, I guess I don't have a loud voice.
I think when you start talking and it
Hello?
will turn on.
Whoa. My name's Nelson Leese, 2009 grad, and I actually was a Tisch scholar back when it was the Center for Active Citizenship. So I really appreciate the work that all of you guys do and put into, improving, both the civic life on campus and in society, at large. I also do a lot of interviewing for the Tufts Admissions Network and one of the things I love talking about with the people who are interviewing is the work that's done at Tisch College. I would like to ask, sort of in the what do we do framework, what are we doing or how is the Tisch College engaging the university and pushing it to change the extreme lack of socioeconomic diversity on campus?
Do I need to? I certainly know that's one of our areas of concern and certainly an area of teaching and scholarship, and it informs, the inequality, I would say, informs all of our programs and everything that we do. We certainly try to use our work to influence and that hopefully create resources to provide those kinds of means to increase socioeconomic diversity. I don't want to speak out of turn because I'm not fully read in on how we're going to get to the goal of need-blind admissions, but I certainly know that's something that's important to people, and it's aspirational, and if we get there, we'd love to think that we contributed in some small way to accomplishing that. Peter, do you want to add anything?
Eleanor looks like he wants to too. No, I mean, I think
go ahead.
first of all, we have to own the problem, which is also a challenge for example, the curriculum and the pedagogy, because we have a certain kind of student body. I mean, our external work is, as you can tell from the prison program, but also from Circle's research, is very oriented towards disadvantaged young people. So the contrast is always quite striking to us. The only other thing I can say is, I do think the university owns that problem, and I say that as someone who tries to be a citizen, partially maybe. I see skepticism, and that's understandable. I think a lot of us try to be good citizens of the university. I was just on the provost search committee, for example, and this kind of issue comes up in the interviews. So, I think, anyway, it matters a lot to us because we can't really do our mission with a student body that's as unrepresentative of the national population as ours is.
Yeah, I just simply want to emphasize that I think you're 100% right, and that the core is financial aid. And so that becomes really the core priority of any fundraising campaign. And we've had discussions about this specifically at the Fletcher School, where when we lose students to other schools, it's very often or almost always because of financial aid. Right? So even at the graduate level, it's a big issue. And so in current fundraising, it is one of the top priorities. Without doing that, I just don't see any way to overcome this challenge.
I'll just say it's a great question.
If I can just respond to the, owning the problem.
Yeah.
It's, and one of the things that really touched this off for me, besides being somebody who was on work study when I was here and worked very hard to stay here and still came out with loans, the New York Times really put us on blast a couple of years ago about this, along with other schools. We are certainly one of the worst schools in the country in this respect. It's an embarrassing thing for me. I think it should be something that Tufts University does work on and think critically about how do we make big changes to improve that. Because it's an embarrassing thing for alums who should be. We're very engaged in trying to talk to people about having gone to the school. And what I would like to see in making first steps and what do we do about addressing that problem?
If I can just add one more. If I can just add one more comment here. So the Fletcher School is in the process of searching for a new dean, right? Because Admiral James Stavridis has just stepped down. We have an interim dean. Dean Stavridis sort of beat the fundraising targets that we had set for the school. but I think we can be far more ambitious. And I'm on the search committee for the new dean. And time and again, we had a meeting just on Thursday. One of the top criteria in terms of what we're searching for is somebody with fundraising capability, because this really has to be at the top of the list. But I think the other way to think about this is, can we come up with new models of financial aid? Right? And there's been a few experiments across the country, but they're still very small, around students repaying a portion of future income, which doesn't penalize people that go into the public service, basically, and enables people that go into financially lucrative jobs to actually repay back more. So some sort of a cross-subsidy there. But I think we need to be thinking more creatively also about the financial aid models. So if any of you have nominations for the dean, do let me know, because I feed that directly to our search firm and our provost.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and you've had your hand up for a very long time and have been very patient.
I'm Lisa Bronner, class of 1989. I want to say thank you to the panel for everything that you're doing, for your impact on Tufts students and also society at large by the work that you're doing. So thank you. My question again is about measuring impact, which you talked a little bit about, but what, if anything, is being done to measure impact systemically? In other words, with respect to students, Tufts students who are involved in this, you shared some anecdotes, but is there an effort perhaps with the advancement department or other departments at Tufts in conjunction with you on systemically measuring the impact? In other words, for instance, Tufts students who then do pursue either careers or other things in their professional life where they reflect to the university, by virtue of the fact I was involved at Tufts, here's the work I'm doing today. Here are some things that I've done that have impacted society because of my studies here, because of the work that I did here. So how are you measuring
Diane,
it
do you wanna-
systemically,
Yeah,
if at all?
so I'm happy to take that question, just because I have been leading up a year-long effort for us to kind of get our arms around how do we move the needle. And unfortunately, we're running short on time, but I could definitely talk to you more about this. But here's a couple of things we know. One is that not everyone comes here with the same sort of level of experience and engagement. And we are definitely trying to saturate the environment with opportunities. And we recognize that not all opportunities are going to have the same impact on all types of students. So what we're trying to get into is to figure out, actually there's a researcher here in the Institute for Applied Research and Youth Development, Rich Lerner, who's probably one of the foremost experts on young adult development. And he uses this ideographic approach where looking at people as individuals in like time and in the environment to figure out what works for different kinds of people. So it is our hope that something that we offer here is going to move the needle in some way for every person. So we're trying to figure out what that is on 3 different levels. The first one is civic identity. So what are the intrapersonal characteristics and values and behaviors that are impacted by our programming. The second one is civic leadership. Al-Noor talked a lot about what he does in his own class, but we know that there's lots of different experiences and opportunities at Tufts that help to move the needle with regard to how do people work in groups interpersonally to achieve some sort of common goal. And then the third aspect is at a systematic level, and that's something we're calling civic agency. So how do you work within and outside of a system to understand the barriers, the challenges, the opportunities, the bureaucracy, to be able to create lasting social change. So, I mean, that's just scratching the surface of a huge effort that we have where we want to look at all of our stakeholders, our students, our faculty, our alumni especially, to see what is the long-term impact of this, and then the communities that we work in to figure out how are the things we're doing here making a difference there. And I just want to, I know Barbara's like about to
I don't
give
have
us the
like a
hook.
hook, yeah, I'm like.
But I want to, we are starting early. So last year we launched a program called Leadership for Social Change for high school students. So if any of you are parents of high schoolers or know high schoolers or work in schools, the application for this year's cohort will come out in December, I believe. So keep an eye on that, because we had 30 high schoolers, 12 of which came from underserved schools in New York City and Boston, and we're hoping to increase that cohort each year and to make this a really great and vibrant program.
Could I also invite people, if you're interested, we're in the process of constructing an advisory committee for the Prison Initiative and would really love to have recent and not so recent alum representing. So if you are interested, please feel free to speak to me today or to email me. I'd love to hear from you.
Great, and that's a great segue. So thank you so much to the panel. And I believe